Welcome to the review slides for neuropsychology. So again, I want to make a stress that these are not necessarily exhaustive lists of everything that you might be asked in the test. I would strongly suggest you using the study guide, the textbook, and of course the full lectures. This is just a quick review of some points that I wanted to kind of hit again and to provide just an additional resource to help you study. So again, broadly speaking, when we're talking about neuropsychology, we're talking about a branch of psychology that focuses on the relationship between brain function and behavior. So when we're talking about neuropsychology, we're really focused on psychology, which is the science of human behavior, but specifically when that behavior is being tied to direct physiological functions, whether that's chemical imbalances, damage, or structural issues within the brain and nervous system. It was formerly a specialty area within clinical psychology, but it's since emerged as a specialty in its own right, and it strongly blends both the medical model and medicine with psychology from both clinical psychology but also cognitive psychology. And from a measurement viewpoint, why we're interested in it is neuropsychological assessment, the evaluation of the brain and nervous system function as it relates to behavior. And most of the neuropsychological assessments we're going to talk about are actually measures of behavior used to infer a physiological problem. So specialty areas include pediatric neuropsychology, so basically, again, looking at the development of children, making assumptions about how their physical systems, their nervous system, their brain functioning is developing based on their behaviors. Geriatric neuropsychology, so kind of the as people age, changes in the physiological functions of their brain and nervous system that might impact behavior and therefore psychology. Forensics neuropsychology, so basically when people's psychological behaviors or thought systems are resulting in criminal acts, and also school neuropsychology, so looking for physiological impairments that may be impacting people's performance in education. So just a brief review again, that the history of this actually stems from matching behaviors and personality changes to known physical damage. So Broca and Wernicke both attributed certain parts of the brain to aphasias, and aphasias are various deficiencies in the ability to behaviorally function. So, for example, Broca actually researched people that had received brain damage, or basically head trauma, to a very specific part of their head, inferring that that damage was also damaging part of the brain. And what he found was that when people were injured in what he referred to as the Broca's area, it disabled their speech. So they could understand what was said to them, and they thought that they were communicating back, but what came out was basically unrecognizable. Wernicke found a similar area, again, based on brain injuries or head trauma that resulted in brain injuries that basically kind of did the opposite aphasia, to where now you could speak, but you couldn't understand other people's language that was spoken to you, so language comprehension. And we also talked a little bit about Phineas Gage, who was a test subject of someone that basically just through pure accident had a large iron rod shot through his skull, doing massive damage to his brain. And what was interesting there was both the idea of neuroplasticity. So neuroplasticity is the fact that the brain actually does have a fair amount of ability to adapt to damage. So overall, Phineas Gage, for the massive amount of brain damage that he received, was fairly functional. There wasn't much difference in his day-to-day functioning. However, it also gave us some information about how physical damage to the brain did not always just result in impairment or aphasia, but it could also change kind of our cognitions and our attitudes. In other words, Phineas Gage was definitely, everyone that knew him said his personality completely changed from before and after the accident. We also talked a little bit about Ward Halston and Ralph Redden, studied brain damage patients, and they are the ones that started to not just kind of connect the dots between physical damage and psychological behavior, but also started to develop test batteries from observing patients that had suffered brain damage in ways to actually determine what damage had been done based on behaviors. So again, most of this research is coming before we had really high-tech and technological methods of doing brain imaging. So today it's very easy to do various scans to find physical damage areas in the brain. However, at the time, unless you actually had the ability to do an autopsy, you often didn't know the extent of actual brain damage when someone suffered head trauma. So these tests were originally developed to kind of allow outside of expensive medical testing or early days outside of an autopsy, the ability to coordinate these behaviors or these deficiencies are related with this type of actual brain damage, which means that then if we have someone that hasn't necessarily directly suffered damage that we know about, but we see these behaviors, we can infer that that same area of their brain or nervous system has suffered some kind of disruption. So the Halsted and Renton tests included number and letter sequences, looking at memory, controlled oral word association, so basically looking at both written and read understanding, but also verbal and oral understanding. The ability to make categorizations, the ability to actually recognize and do hand-eye coordination and recognize different textures, the ability to recognize rhythms, speech sound perception tests, and also finger oscillation tests, so again, fine motor coordination. So based on these, we do have the modern neuropsychological evaluation, and generally a neuropsychological evaluation is indicated a lot of times when a patient is referred to a psychologist. So a psychologist may be dealing with someone that's experiencing, for example, a change in mood, a change in behavior, a change in functioning. And sometimes the question is, can we do a series of neuropsychological evaluations to determine is there a physical component of this? Generally, a battery of tests will be conducted, most likely including an intelligence test, personality test, and also perceptual motor memory test. And there's basically two ways to look at neuropsychological evaluation. So there is the medical hard signs, so an indicator of definite neurological deficit, cranial nerve damage, neuroimaging, MRIs, functional MRIs, CAT scans, also actual hormone or various levels of various chemicals in the body. Soft signs are indicators that are merely suggestive of a neurological deficit, an apparent inability to accurately copy a stimuli figure, for instance. So these batteries of tests that we use can use both hard and soft signs, but a lot of times the soft signs are easier to do and often are lower cost than trying to do the hard signs. So there's fixed and flexible batteries. So fixed batteries is a set of neurological tests that are determined by a test publisher. We have some examples here. So the Halsted and Renton test, for example, is a series of tests that are not meant to be taken in isolation. They're meant as a broad battery, and based on the performance of all the tests, a diagnosis is determined. Flexible approach permits the clinicians to choose the most appropriate test case by case. So very useful with a priori diagnosis. So fixed batteries are very good when you're just wanting to get an idea of is there anything physiologically wrong based on the behaviors of this person on these tests. A flexible test is much better when you're anticipating, I think that I know what's wrong with this person. I think I know they've suffered some damage or they've had a stroke or some problem in this particular area. I'm just wanting to confirm it with the test. So, for example, if you have an a priori just means before the fact, basically, you have an idea before you ever test what you're looking for. And you think that there is a memory issue, then instead of giving someone an entire battery of tests, a fixed set of tests, you could give them just specifically a set of memory tests. Again, we talked about a lot of the different individual tests that can be both gotten as a flexible test, but are often incorporated into these fixed batteries. And there's a lot of different ones, and each one is looking at basically, again, behavioral cues to potential physiological issues. The Stroop test, for instance, is a common problem that we have in processing information when words and colors are in contrast, so trying to read the word green when the word is actually red. However, not only do we have a problem doing these tasks, so it's slow, but there's also, after a while, people can start to basically get better at the test. So doing the Stroop test can give indications of possible categorization or problems with people processing information. Things tests may miss may include personality changes, so sudden changes in temperament may still have a physiological cause but may not necessarily be picked up in these batteries. The swearing or inappropriate use of language, lack of extreme emotional reaction, and depression. So these tests are not 100% accurate. They're made based on information that we've gathered over the years of various behavioral or psychological traits or responses that people have that are highly associated with a physiological problem. There's also the problem with faking. So people can, if they're especially wanting to basically either fail or pass a test, can try to fake around these tests. And just giving a test, ignoring a patient's history, including the medical, social, and psychological and educational background, can also be a problem. So basically, if you give someone that has had a very poor educational or social background a test that involves a lot of items that require a certain amount of education, the test may indicate physiological damage when it is actually just the result of social and educational deficits.